Greetings and welcome to another episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. I'm your host, Scott, and with me as always is my stupendous, you know what, I already used that word, but I'll say it. I did. Stupendous co-host, Caleb. Caleb, how are you?
I guess I'm stupendous. It's been decided.
Good. I nailed that one for sure. We're back again to talk about the experience growing up as youth group kids in the 90s and how that has shaped our adult lives. We'll talk to old friends about their faith journeys from the 90s to today and discuss current cultural topics through the lens of someone who grew up during that era. Caleb, who is our guest today? Tell us.
Today was the fantasy baseball superstar Adam, who joined us to talk about his experience. He's growing up in youth group in St. Louis.
Yeah, superstar is right. He's really good at that and a lot of other things. I've known Adam for a few years through that medium, actually. I just met him through some friends who play fantasy baseball together, and you know, he's always a really funny guy. I'll be honest, every time I've talked to him, it's always been super sharp and energetic. He loves his puns. He loves making jokes about, not to get super nerdy on the fantasy baseball stuff, which I have been doing for decades. One of the things that is really fun to do is you draft your team, and then you figure out a team name based on the players you drafted, right? So, well, I won't give examples because they're stupid, but Adam is the best at looking at your roster and then figuring out a team name for your team. It's unreal. It's unreal. However, this conversation is the opposite of that. He's, and not in a bad way, right? He's just super intentional about his time and explaining how his time at youth group really made him who he is, how and why it's important to him, and how it continues to be an important part of his life.
Yeah, really, really detailed about kind of the experience and how it's impacted his life, and really even how that leader, the leader of their youth group, just the way he impacted Adam's life, and that was something that he very much, you could tell, wanted to articulate very, very clearly.
Indeed. And we won't spoil it too much, but a lot of his experience have culminated in a really cool passion project of his, and you'll hear about that in the episode. And it's something that I heard he told me about many years ago, and it's come to fruition. So it was cool to kind of catch him at this time of his dream being realized. Yeah. But not only that, how's God working through that? You know, how did God work through him in the lives of other people to get to this point? And now that's kind of been completed, what does it mean for him? So that was a very, very fun part of the conversation for me.
Yeah, for sure. No, I was talking to my wife after we got done recording, and she was like, well, that passion project sounds really interesting. I'm not trying to give too much away. Right. So she was like, oh, I'm excited to hear this episode.
Right.
Like, yeah.
So we recently recorded this, and then Adam texted us afterwards, and he's like, man, I sounded really holier than thou on that, I think. I'm really sorry if I came across that way. And we were bantering back and forth about it, but I think he said he has a master's degree in disobedience. So maybe if we put that in the intro a little bit, he'll feel a little bit more comfortable with the rest of the episode itself.
Yeah.
So, but Adam, there you go. We've made sure that the people know that, you know, you're not the perfect person. Not that you come across that way or that you're full of yourself at all in any regard on this episode, but thank you for being conscientious that way. But fun episode. It's kind of what we're going for, you know, someone who's very willing to talk through their experience then and now and how that shapes them into who they are today.
Yep, exactly.
So, Adam, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And as always, to you, the listener, thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoy.
I want to break in and quickly remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed on this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s may not be held by or even approved of by everyone appearing on this episode. One of the goals of this show is to give everyone a safe space to share their opinions and thoughts on deeply personal matters of faith. We are not looking to start an argument, but instead we want to let people share how they feel. During our interviews and discussions, we may not represent every point of view on a given subject, and we understand that this may be frustrating at times, but it is the nature of a podcast discussion with a limited amount of time. We also know and want to acknowledge that our memories of events that happened 25 to 30 years ago may not be 100% accurate. We assume everyone's best intentions as they share how they remember the experience of their youth. Now, back to the show.
All right, we are joined tonight by our friend Adam. Adam, we really appreciate you to spend some time with us tonight. It's good to see you. I see you a few times a year, and I think the last time I probably contacted you, besides trying to set up this episode, is probably for a fantasy baseball trade of some sort. So, probably the last thing I talked to you about.
That sounds about right. That sounds about right, Scott. And I'm sorry if I declined it, but I'm very protective of my hypothesized baseball talent.
As am I, and it's a very competitive league that we play in with our buddy Tim, who's recorded for us. So it can get cutthroat
Yes,
a little bit.
Tim
But yes,
Johnson.
you should be because you're a very good player. You should be protective of your knowledge. So
Kind of you to say. I probably rob some fun out of it sometimes, but winning's the goal, I guess, huh?
that is true. Well, again, we really appreciate taking the opportunity to chat with us tonight. Let's start from the beginning. What was your Christian upbringing like, or was it even Christian? Was it a Christian home? And how did you end up attending youth group in the 90s?
I grew up in a Christian home, so far as I knew, and it was. We went to a Methodist church, which, as I look back, and I don't know about the experience of anybody else that went to a Methodist church, and this is just only through my eyes for the one church that I went to until I'm probably 15 years old. And it was just an experience of deep in ritual, shallow in relationship. And not like shallow in like interpersonal relationship, but I never heard anything about a personal relationship with Jesus during my time at that church. I didn't know that was a thing. We sang hymns, they lit candles. There's lots of pomp and circumstance. And I, not that that's a bad thing. I just, and whether I wasn't listening or it wasn't there, I just missed the whole concept of Jesus cares about you. Jesus wants to have a personal relationship with you, and that's an option. You can choose to be saved. Baptism in the Methodist Church typically happens as a baby. It's not a personal decision. So I was invited to a youth group about my sophomore year of high school, 15, 16 years old. And when I started going there, man, that felt different. It was a place where you belonged. The music wasn't a hymn. It was a worship song where they're playing like Third Day or Jars of Clay in the background. There was a lot of camaraderie that I couldn't really place because I hadn't experienced it before. Just being loved better by people that were there. It was awesome. So I was hooked.
That's awesome. I'm assuming it was a larger church setting than your Methodist church, or am I wrong about that?
They were both relatively large. Methodist Church was pretty dang large. The church that I ended up going to is a church called First Evangelical Free Church. It's in a suburb of St. Louis. And the youth pastor there, a guy named Bruce Roquet, who is one of the top 5 best men I've ever met in my life. He was just an awesome guy that loved people well. He was sincere. He cared. He was fun. And so having him kind of shepherd us, he just set the tone really well. And I wish everybody could have that type of youth group experience. What I experienced, I wish everybody could have that. It was that good.
That's awesome. I do like hearing about our youth leaders that resonated with kids that way. I feel like, we had a pretty good one too. And we've talked to a couple of other people who have that very endearing memory of who their youth pastor is and was. And they're just pouring out their lives and hearts into kids. And that's really admirable. No matter what people think of the
It's awesome.
context, right? It's an admirable thing to try and do.
Oh, sure. Just trying to connect with people that need love and connection the most, and just giving, high school kids a safe place to be, and to try to sort out how confusing life is or can be at that time. It's awesome.
Indeed. Well, how did youth group help formulate your faith? Like what adjectives would you use to describe your faith in the 90s during that time?
I would say once I got to First E Free, ascending and growing, I really started reading the Bible for the first time. I really started digging more deeply into music that fed me better. So I fell in love with Third Day. Good lyrics, strong guitar, like, it sounded like Pearl Jam with a better message type of thing. And that really resonated with me, just having better tools and resources that kind of helped to grow my heart better. And so, but I would say that overall, I've always been kind of a hands and feet type of guy, more service oriented. So once I got a little bit established, going to First E Free and attending youth group there, I started the first ever Bible study at my public high school during my senior year. And then we also, I led a small group of folks. We would go downtown to like downtown St. Louis, which is rough. And there's a place called the New Life Evangelistic Center at the time, run by a guy named Larry Rice. And they would give you a map. Like this was pre-cell phone, like they give you a map and some peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and you could bring hot chocolate or whatever. And we would just go find homeless people on a
Mm.
Sunday night and talk to them and give them food and give them blankets and encourage them. And so I would say ascending and growing were a big part of who I was during the youth group of the 90s. And, but always around a service oriented idea. I was never much of a, there were always people that knew more Bible verses than me and always were better references of biblical knowledge than I was. That has never been my absolute strength. I've always been more hands and feet.
Caleb, did we? I mean, Adam, I'm assuming you might have done like missions trips over, to other countries or something like that too. Like, but locally, what was the name of the homeless shelter? Dorothy Day Center. We had that. That's all I can remember
Hmm.
though.
Yep, that's about all we did. I think we did the Dorothy Day Center like what, a couple times a year.
It's a quarter
And
maybe.
yeah, I don't know if there's the difference of being in Woodbury. There just wasn't as much of that. And so I don't know. We did not do a whole lot of more local stuff.
Well, it's not like Woodbury is far from downtown
Yeah.
Minneapolis. It's like
Woodbury
20
is not far from
minutes.
rough. I mean, you can go to East St. Paul and you're finding people
Yeah.
that need
Exactly,
help.
exactly. That's a cool part of the faith for you because it's active and serving someone else, and I appreciate, especially for kids, giving them that opportunity or allowing them to find those opportunities. We talked with somebody the other day, and it was quite clear that sometimes youth groups can push kids outside of their comfort zone and maybe a way that they didn't intend to or shouldn't. Like maybe you're pushing an introvert to be more engaged than they want to be, that sort of stuff. I think that aspect of serving other people's is a highlight for me as well because it really does force you to grow.
Well, and both those things, the Bible study at the high school and the homeless shelter stuff, those were independent of the youth group. Those are just things I did. So I think what the youth group did well is they equipped and they emboldened and they challenged so that, it was, they would feed us like spiritually and then go out into your world and make a difference. And I really took to heart that challenge. So they didn't provide the structural support of, hey, we have this contact downtown.
Mm,
This, so you need to go to, no, that was just me going, okay, what
mm.
can I do?
What difference can I actually make?
And it was almost, for me, it was cooler that way to not be spoon fed
Mm.
it, but to have it be something that God's like, hey, I'm whispering to you. Do you hear me? Will you do this? And like looking back, I'm like, as an 18-year-old kid, I took a few guys and we drove downtown into the dark parts looking for home, like on a Sunday night,
Yeah.
like that's in retrospect, that's wild. I mean, downtown St. Louis is not, don't get stuck
You
there.
need at least a permission slip signed at this in today's youth group, or if not something else.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Well, that's good on you. That's great. It's cool to listen to that jump from the youth group setting to, hey, how can I actually make a difference somewhere else? So good on you for making that, giving not only yourself but kids those opportunities. How about the youth group itself? Like, what are some really vivid memories that pop and or teaching moments that just really are still part of who you are today?
What I remember quite clearly, they always did a good job with retreats, whether it's like a weekend retreat. Went on a 1 week retreat into the mountains of Colorado. So we're in the Rockies. And that was amazing. And that's really when I came to faith
Hmm.
because I looked around, like you're surrounded by all this outstanding beauty. And there were several people that had something that I didn't have that I really wanted. They just had a peace about them and they had a joy about them. And it was in that setting where I really noticed the gap between their existence and mine spiritually. And so youth group always had events that challenged you and changed you. So I really benefited from the retreats. I really benefited from all those special types of things. But independent of that, on Sunday nights, I just couldn't wait to go. It was like Sundays and Wednesdays. And I couldn't wait to go. And I just remember just getting there as fast as I could and staying as long as I could because feeling like you belong and feeling like you're accepted, particularly during high school, that's not a given in high school all the time. So I think the environment that they had, just the way that it felt to walk into the door, I want people to feel that way when they walk into my door. I want them to feel like they're home, like they're safe, like they're accepted, like they're seen. It's that youth group type feel that people just, if they can walk into your door and they can't wait to get there and they
Yeah.
don't want to leave, I think we're doing it right. And that feeling is how I felt consistently during my time in youth group. And that's what sticks out the
Nice.
most. The music was good, the teaching was good, but the love was great.
Well done, Bruce, wherever you're at. He's,
You know, he passed away I think in
hmm,
2021. And that was it's
yeah.
terrible. It's hard.
Sounds like it had a huge impact on a lot of people.
Oh, so many people. He's an awesome man.
Now you have a couple of kids, right? What are they part of youth group? Are you telling them stories of how, what what is like for you and are you translating any of your experience into their lives?
They go to church with me and they do like Sunday school. We go to Eagle Brook in the Wayzata campus. And they do love their Sunday school. When they're not of the age yet where youth group is a thing, the they have a middle school program and a high school program. So we're Emma is 9 and Anna is 6. So we're a couple years or 3 or 4 years out before we get to those things. I do look forward to sharing youth group experiences with them. We're just not really there
Hmm.
quite yet. But I do look back so fondly on that time, and I want them to be encouraged to seek out that same type of experience for
Sure.
themselves.
Sure. Sounds like they're ready to do that, even though they may not know it. I mean, it's ready to go.
They're
Yeah.
so good. Yeah, I'm excited for what's ahead for them. No
What
question.
about like after high school? Did you hang around? Did you move away? Did you keep in contact with your friends from the group, or was graduation maybe more of a hard cutoff?
I moved up to Minnesota to go to the University of Minnesota from St. Louis. So it was a pretty hard cutoff from that perspective, just the distance alone. But coming home for Thanksgiving or Christmas, in the summer times, we had a college group. And so I transitioned into that during the summer times. And Bruce transitioned into the college
Mm,
ministry. His son was my age. And so actually his son and a couple other people came up and went to Bethel.
Mm.
So I could go to Bethel, go to their Sunday night vespers, worship service, and see people that I knew and cared about. So that was really neat. But it was a desperate search once I got to college to try to find my place on campus that could have that type of feel, that type of fellowship camaraderie. Because like freshman year, I really missed it. And that was a huge void
mm.
for me. So, but if it wasn't for what I experienced at youth group in high school, there's no way that I would have known to look for it in college.
Mm.
So that kind of became like my guiding light, type of thing as something to look for. And I didn't stop till I found it
Sure.
at the U.
Sure. Well, you and I may have gone to the same church at different times, but I know at least the church I go to is focused on kids at the U, students at the U, trying to minister to
Sure.
them, and they get a large contingent of them still. September through May, the church is double in size. Well, not quite double, but it's a lot larger because the students are around. So sometimes that college ministry stuff I think is a tough thing for churches to do because it's such a important time for students to be focusing on their studies and everything. And there's probably more than I know of, but at least the church I go to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe you went there too. Like they were very intentional about that part of the population.
Are we name dropping or not name dropping at that
No,
church?
we can name drop.
So if we're talking about Hope
Yes.
Community Church, they started, it took me until spring semester to find them. They were right across the street from the
Mm,
dorms, right across the street from
hmm
Territorial Hall. So they were in a church right across from
hmm
campus for a few years. They didn't move downtown. I'm not sure when they secured that building, but they were renting that church right across from the four dorms on campus for a few
hmm
years. And so I think part of the student focus, not only Pastor Steve Treichler's personal testimony about coming to faith in Christ in college, but um, I think because they were originally located on the U of M campus or right across the street, it was a natural ministry point for them. And so they just kept that up. And I remember when they got the new building downtown across from the old Metrodome, and they got a small bus, the Hope bus. And the big joke was, I hope it runs because it was always
Yeah.
breaking down. But they've always hoped, yeah, I hope church has always done a fantastic job of ministering to college age students for
Hope
sure.
Bus is still around. I
One of the
can
best.
I can testify to that, and it looks like it runs just fine. So students are there.
Well,
I'm assuming it's a different
God is
bus than the
good.
one you rode on.
Gosh, I would hope so. I mean, that thing, like you didn't have enough duct tape type of thing.
They made it work. They made it work. Well, let's talk about kind of instead of that 90s youth group experience, just talk about how things are today. Like comparatively, what does your faith look like now as an adult to what it was like in the 90s?
They're similar in the way that my internal servanthood fabric, I think, is still very well intact. So I'm still kind of a hands and feet type of guy. I don't spend much time trying to formulate my own hypothesis on the tribulation or anything, So uh, I mean, I read the Bible every single day, but there are biblical scholars that are way deep in the weeds in a way that I never could be, and there's a lot of value there. That's not just, but I've just never been that guy. One of the big differences is I've softened as a person quite a bit. I always had a heart for people, but I've really softened. I was on a flight in 2002, and I remember being at the gate, and I see this couple, and the husband, is really disfigured. He had a lot of stuff on his face, almost like warts
Hmm.
and different things, and he had one limb. One of his legs was gigantic compared to the other. And I sat there, I'm like, man, I would love to get their story. I wonder what it's like to be that guy. As it turns out, I sat next to them on the plane. And in talking to his wife, who sat next to me, I learned that he has something called elephantiasis. It's a lymphatic disease. And the way you get it is you're in a tropical area and you get bit by the wrong mosquito. This guy was a young man. He was a stud, handsome guy. He's a surfer, just you know, um, she described him as an overwhelmingly handsome individual. And then he got bit a couple times by a mosquito that had also bitten someone that already had this disease. And then he got it because he got bit by the wrong mosquito. And seemingly overnight, his body just became disfigured. And it was very clear that he was very uncomfortable in public. But I mean, can you imagine that type of existence. One day, life is awesome, and the next day, just because the wrong mosquito bit you, now you have this terrible disease the rest of your life. And they became special education teachers. And so he was able to get the unconditional love from his students that he desperately needed. He was able to give it back to them. And it's just a really neat and great story. And so I found myself becoming much more curious about other people and their path and their story, and cultivated over time just a really deep desire to help people feel seen and reminded that they matter. So I would say over time, the biggest difference between me and at 18, 19 years old to now is that I'm much more empathetic, I'm much more curious, and I'm much softer toward people. I'm not as judgmental or as hard on them or as competitive against them as I used to be.
Interesting. Good on you for having that conversation. It's especially in that scenario.
Well, when God tees it up,
Mm-hmm.
you know, yeah, when God tees it up like that, I think sometimes he makes it a lot easier for us to lean in with people when he just sets it up that way. It's awesome.
Is there any certain event or teaching that you might approach differently or you might handle differently now that, you're at the stage that you're at? Is there something you look back on and you may think about it differently in a theological aspect?
I love to retrace different parts of the gospel, different stories in the gospel, and just really ask God, can you show me something new? And last year I was reading through Luke 19, this story about Zacchaeus, the wee little man tax collector. Jesus is coming around and there's a big crowd and he's too short to see above the crowd. And the Bible says he's very curious about Jesus. So he runs ahead, runs down the road, climbs into a tree and sits on this branch. And Jesus walks up, sees him from a distance, calls him by name. And Zacchaeus comes down from the tree. They have dinner together and it totally transforms the life of Zacchaeus. And in that story, now when I read that, the part that I'd like to play in that story is the tree. It was a sycamore fig tree. And I want to be the sycamore fig tree. I want to be used by God where I'm planted to hold up people that are curious about Jesus so they can see him better. So that's that teaching in particular. And that has shaped my life mission going forward. So I wrote a book about interviewing people on airplanes called Lessons from Coach. It just came out. Because I self-published it, I created a new entity, a new little LLC, and it's called Sick Fig Media, Sycamore Fig Tree. So every single day when I get up in the morning, part of my daily prayer is, God, help me to be the sycamore fig tree today. Help me to be available to you where I'm planted, to hold up people that are curious about Jesus so they can see you better. So everything that I aspire to do personally and professionally, I ask God to show me how to be the sycamore fig tree while I'm walking through my day. And that has absolutely transformed the way that I see people and the way that I try to engage with them.
That's awesome. I distinctly remember you telling me about this idea for a book you had years ago before a fantasy baseball draft. And then all of a sudden I see it on Facebook. You're like, oh, my book came out. I'm like, oh, dude, that was awesome. Like it came to fruition. It's amazing.
Yeah. And, there's a Jimmy John's commercial where there's a guy that looks like he's about 90 and he's got his rotary phone and he's dialing Jimmy John's and he calls and he places his order and they knock on his door in about 2 seconds after he hangs up. And he goes, what took you so long? And that's kind of how this book felt. It's like, what took you so long? I fell in love with the idea of trying to see more value in the person next to you. And so I started hopping on airplanes to anywhere in the continental United States. So I'd fly to Phoenix or Seattle or Boston, Philadelphia. I'd fly all over. And the only reason that I would ever book a flight would be so that I could interview the person I sat next to on the plane. I didn't have anything going in Seattle. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any plans. I booked the trip solely so I could interview or try to interview the person next to me on the airplane. So I ended up doing 33 interviews. I was only turned down 3 times. Well, yeah, which blew my mind. I thought for sure that my success rate as far as interview would be much lower. Of the 33, 14 people cried on my shoulder during the interview. We got really deep, and professionally speaking, it's the coolest thing I've ever done. And also, it's the whole thing was just obedience. At the time, I was going through a divorce. I didn't have any money. In fact, I was driving for Uber and Lyft on the weekends, and every single time when someone would hop in my car and say, "Hey, I just want to thank you for riding with me tonight because this trip is going toward a passion project I'm working on, and I just want to say thank you."
Mm.
And 9 times out of 10, they'd say, "So what's the project?" And I tell them, I start talking about the trips I'd been on, and we get to like the Target Center, just whatever their destination was for their event, and they'd say, "Okay, I know I got to go, but I have like 2 more questions for you." And that's when I knew, I'm like, I think this is sticky.
Sure.
I think we kind of have something
Sure.
here. When people, still want to talk to Uber guy, when they, it's like they're going to go see the T-Wolves, but they'd rather, stay and talk to Uber guy. I think
Pay
we
the
got
extra
something.
fee just to ask a few more questions to hang around.
Yeah, I'll drive around the block one more
There
time
you
if you want
go.
me to. But Lessons from Coach, that book, and it just came out last month. It's been a really neat ride, but it has taught me about the power of obedience because I didn't have any money. I'm like, God, how's this
Mm.
supposed to work? I don't have the money. Oh, here's some money. So I book a flight and I hop on a plane. Well, now what? In the very first interview I ever did, I'm sitting next to this lady, and I like formulated 7 questions I decided I was going to ask everybody. I call it my core questions because as you answer them, I learn a bit about who you are at your core. One of the questions is, what was the best day of your life? And she says, I just signed up for Be the Match, which is the bone marrow transplant organization. And about 2 weeks after signing up, I get a call that there's an 18-year-old who has leukemia and is dying and desperately needs a bone marrow transplant. And can I help? So she goes down and meets with the doctors at Mayo, very impressed with the doctors at Mayo, agrees to the transplant surgery. So they drill 4 holes into her pelvic bone, extract the bone marrow. She wakes up in excruciating pain for days on end, terrible pain. But the best day of her life is the day that she enters into terrible pain to save the life of a stranger with cancer. And that was my first flight. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So showing up in obedience, trying to hear what God is asking me to do, and just show up in obedience. The whole thing is this whole book is just an offering. It's just me trying to show up in obedience and just put myself there and let God do the rest.
I'll stay on the book a little bit because it's super interesting, especially 33 interviews. That's impressive.
It was
I
wild.
was like, oh, maybe you got like 10 chapters. Sounds good. Like that's a lot. And I probably would have been the one to be like, no thanks, maybe, but I know you well enough to know you got a way about you to keep people engaged. So was there anything like after the whole project was finished that you could identify as like a spiritual lesson or something that God was teaching you spiritually just about people from the conversations you had?
I think there's so many threads you could pull on there. In general terms, I think the average person is carrying around something much heavier than we understand that they are. And people are desperate to be able to be given a chance to be seen and or to lay down the heavy thing for a little bit and talk about it. I think also that the average person has something really great that God has put inside them. That if we lean in enough, they have the secret facet about them. Almost like if you're looking at like a diamond or something, if you look really close, that's the only way you'll see it. God puts special things in everybody. But sometimes we go so fast. Jesus's ministry was at what, 3 miles an hour? Because that's kind of the walking pace. We don't go 3 miles an hour on
Right.
anything. And I think sometimes we miss the opportunity to see the brilliance that God puts in people. And then he puts those people in our path. The one other thing that really stood out was how often I think God puts people in our path. And I kind of wonder how often we miss it. We're on our phone. We've got headphones on. It's like, how do I show up when I walk into a coffee shop? What does that look like? Am I ever really truly present? I think sometimes we treat our attention span like it's a dimmer switch instead of an on-off switch. It's like you're either present or you're not. It's not a dimmer switch. You're not 70% here and 30% on your phone. You're 100% on your phone. And then you look up and then maybe you're 100% there if you choose to be. But I had one experience, and this is not like an ordained experience. One of the guys in the book, he said, okay, I've done your interview. Now I want you to go skydiving. Because his whole thing was about skydiving. And so we shook on it. I agreed to go skydiving, which was a terrible proposition. So I booked the skydiving trip. And I'm getting ready to show my daughters on like YouTube because they have a YouTube channel. I'm like, this is what daddy's
Sure.
about to go do. And so I Google the name of the skydiving place and it auto populates death. So I see Sebastian skydive death. I'm like, what? And so I start reading. They'd had like 3 deaths over the last 6 years at this place. Guys jumping out of the same plane I'm about to jump out of that had died. All of a sudden, I have an unbelievable amount of uncertainty about this skydiving trip. So I'm talking with my family, I'm talking with my friends, trying to figure out, I've already paid for it. What do
Oh,
I do? So 2 nights before I'm supposed to go down, I finish talking to my buddy about this, and we kind of arrive at the idea I can go down there, I can talk to them. If I don't feel absolutely certain that it's safe, then I don't have to jump. I can just, I can walk away. I get off the phone with him, and Powerball was like maybe 600 million or like $1 billion or something. I'm not sure God wants us to play Powerball.
it's like,
Anyway,
where's this going?
I I walk into this gas station and I buy a Powerball ticket. And as the guy is getting it, I just anecdotally mention, I'm like, hey, I'm supposed to go skydiving in a couple of days. If I win Powerball, I'm not going to go. And he looks up and he goes, I've done 1,200 jumps. Is this your first time? I was like, yeah. He goes, it is a tandem jump. I'm like, yeah. He goes, let me tell you about your tandem skydive. And starts to walking me through all these details. This is the type of equipment it's going to be. This is how the parachute works. This is the type of posture you're going to have when you get on the edge of the plane. This is what he's going to tell you to do. All of
Whoa.
these things with one detail at a time, kind of chipping away at my fear of the unknown. So he finishes explaining it to me. He goes, you know what's weird? I don't really even work here. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, well, my buddy owns this gas station. And I guess the guy that's supposed to work tonight bailed. And so in a pinch, he called me and I was free. He goes, I don't work here. And he goes, I'm an engineer. So I've been an engineer for like
Okay.
25 years. That's what I do. But I wonder how many times we have something in our life that we're fearful of, that we're worried about, that's weighing us down. And God puts the person that can answer our question or that can put us at ease, puts them in our path, and we miss it. How often do we miss it because we're just not present? We're not available. And that was one of the big things, like with this book. Every single person that I talked to, it was unbelievable what I learned and all the things that God kind of interwove in. I felt his hand on all of this. And I just wonder how often he's just as present, but I'm not. And that's the one of the big things from the book that I really took away of, man, like God has special things. God puts people in my path every single day that I can either encourage or be kind to, or I can bless them, or they can help me, or I can help them. I need to show up way better in my world. And when I do that, I experience God more. And past couple of years, my day-to-day life has been, I felt God's presence so much more. And I think just the biggest difference is like God hasn't been more present. I think he's present all the time. It's just that I've chosen to be more present for what he wants me to
Sure.
do.
I hear in your stories a lot of intentionality of understanding how God is working in the lives of people around you and where you can support them, right? Whether they are random person you just met, or people that have been in your life for a long time. It's like I hear you saying like, I know people need other people. How can I use them to stay focused on God in whatever capacity it might look like for them? Good for you. I'm excited to read your stories because now I want to get your book and read it. It sounds really compelling.
Thank you. I think that God has put something in each of us, and sometimes it's big and sometimes it's
Mhm.
scary, or it's the thing that we're not sure that we can do. I just hope that whether or not people buy the book or read it, like bigger picture is if I can just point up and say, you know what, God has something that he wants to do in you and through you that is going to be amazing. And if I can just challenge people to do one thing, it's just make yourself available to what God is tugging on your heart to do.
I'm a little curious. One more question about the book. Sorry, digging a little bit deeper. But how often did the conversation turn towards the spiritual nature of things? Did you find that more people than you expected were ended up talking about whatever relationship with God they might have, or was that not really a part of the interviews that you did?
I'm so glad you asked that. One of my questions was, what are your thoughts on God? So I that was built in, and I just shared what people said. So there were some atheists that said, you know what, I don't mind people that are that believe in a God or have a faith, but don't you dare push it
Mm,
on me. And I share what they, so there are several stories in the book that just line up with, like, not everything lines up with what I believe. I'm just sharing what they
sure.
told me. And so I almost had a page that in the very front about how to read this book. And it was going to say, you know what? Whether you're politically left or right, whether you're spiritually based or not, whether you believe in pro-life or pro-choice, I promise you that part of this you will love and part of this you will hate, because I just told, I'm telling you what people told me. It's their opinions, not mine. But yeah, it was amazing to talk about faith things and to ask that question and just let them answer. So there is a lot of faith, like a lot of faith-based stuff.
Cool. I bet you had a variety of stories on that one too.
Yeah. And it's fun to get the kind of a fuller spectrum on
Hmm.
that, because it is cool to just to share like like a big spectrum of what people
Hmm.
tend to believe. So, and it gives you a better appreciation for where people may be at.
True. True. Well, let's kind of steer it back towards some of these youth group questions, and just kind of how faith looks like for you today. Is there anything that you might, through these experiences, look back on uh, from your youth group experience and maybe struggle with a little bit, or be like, maybe we shouldn't have done that, or we could do that, we could have done that a little bit differently. Is there anything like that that you look back on and struggle with a little bit?
I have difficulty finding flaws in my YouTube
Once again,
experience.
shout out Bruce.
It was, yeah, it was so dang good. Uh, there was a subgroup that I I didn't learn about until later called the 88 Rollers, and they would TP people's houses. So, so,
I see.
um, yeah. So, like every once in a while, like in the corner of the whiteboard, it would say 88 Rollers, and those were the nights they're going to have their meetings. But they would TP people's houses, which is fine. Like it's harmless. It's no
Sure.
big deal. I think though that hints to the idea, and this was present now that I think about it more. Group segmentation and having little subgroups and having little cliques, and it's hard not to have some of that. I think people just tend to gravitate toward like-minded people that have the same interests, and so that's going to happen in any large group. There are going to be subgroups, so it's probably impossible to not have that. But I think to the best of our ability, I think any good group makes sure that everyone has a way to feel included. And so I think most of the time our youth group did a great job of helping people to feel included and belong. But I think it's always aspirational to do your very best with that and have that be front and center of your efforts.
Yeah, Caleb and I mentioned it, especially early on when we were talking to some old friends. Like our youth pastor was very intentional about making sure us, which were kind of a more of a, I struggle to say this term, but like the core group, because we've been there for a long time. We were going every single week. We were identified as leaders for better or worse during youth group events. They would be like, "You guys cannot hang out together. You got to break that click up." And yeah, I get it. As I kind of, even though there's some things I don't agree with, I actually do agree with that in a sense. Like you guys see each other all the time. You don't need to continue to do that here for the sake of breaking down some of those walls and group barriers and making sure everyone feels included to the best of our ability.
I think every group needs a
Hmm.
Barnabas.
In what way?
Um, well, Joseph, I think of Cyprus was his actual name. Barnabas was his nickname, and Barnabas means son of encouragement. I think every group needs good encouragement and somebody that is really good at encouraging. Every group needs a Barnabas. But I can also appreciate when you have a good group of core friends, there's nothing better than hanging out with your friends, particularly in high school. It's hard to beat. And so every time you get a chance to do that, why wouldn't you
Right.
want to do that?
Yeah. What I'll kind of focus on my personal favorite questions on the on our list here, which is, what would your 18-year-old self say to you today, and what would your current self say to your high school youth group self back then?
think my 18-year-old self would say, don't stop dreaming and keep swinging for the fences. I've always been a big dreamer. I tried to walk onto the University of Minnesota basketball team. That did not work. That failed miserably, in fact. but but I've always been a guy that dreams, and I've always gone after it in life for the most part. And I think the 18-year-old version of myself would be very proud of the idea that I keep dreaming, I keep swinging for the fences. I'm not afraid to fail. I think my 43-year-old self, which is 3 years ago now, would say to my 18-year-old self, get good at waiting. I don't think that I've ever truly had a good understanding of what God does with waiting. So sometimes I think it's punishment that I have to wait when it's actually protection. Or there's growth, but all I feel is the growing pain, and I focus on the pain instead of the growth. So I feel like if I could whisper into the ear of my 18-year-old self, I would encourage him to get good at waiting and also to learn to see how God sees waiting.
Mm-hmm.
Because waiting's all in the Bible. Oh, you're going to build an ark? Guess what? It's not going to be for tomorrow. You know, I mean, there's waiting all
Yeah.
in the Bible. It's all over the place.
It is a little bit of a spiritual discipline, particularly when you believe in a God who's not going to speak audibly to you for the most part. Not that I've never
Right.
experienced that, but yeah, I that's a good reminder to lean into it a little bit. And for me, it's a little practice of trust too. Like, do you trust God enough to wait and
Totally.
not
I agree with
get
that.
what you want right away or get it in a different way?
Yeah. Well, and I think those are dangerous prayers. Like, God help me to be patient, which typically results in opportunities for us to practice being patient. Like I think it's a very dangerous prayer to ask to learn how to get better at waiting, because inevitably you'll be given opportunities to
Mhm.
wait,
Indeed.
which is very hard to do.
Careful what you wish for, I suppose. So,
So absolutely.
as a author yourself, are you an avid reader? And if so, like, have you had authors or teachers impact your current spiritual life where you're at today?
I do like reading. I have the problem of only being able to read nonfiction. If it's fiction, I just want to watch the movie. I just, even though I've never heard it said once in my life, the movie was better than the book. I've never
Yes,
heard that.
true. Yep.
But nonetheless, if there's a movie version, I'm going there. So I do enjoy reading, but I feel like it needs to be something that I can apply. So there's a book by, oh, I'm going to reach for it. David Brooks. It's called How to Know a Person. The art of being others, the art of seeing others deeply and being deeply
Mm.
seen. Great title. Good book. And that some of the stuff from Ryan Holiday is good. I don't delve as much. I do like Mark Batterson and his stuff. In a Pit with a Lion on a Snowy Day, The Circle Maker, which is about prayer. I do like Mark Batterson stuff quite a bit. But as far as like teaching goes, probably the best teacher I've had in my life was my youth group leader, and then he became my mentor, Bruce Roque, because he ended up moving up to Minneapolis. I'm not sure what year, because two of his children live up in the cities now. Him and his wife moved here, and I had the benefit of sitting down with him from time to time and breaking bread and having quality conversations. And then when I found myself in the midst of divorce, Bruce was there, and we met once or twice a month and talked on the phone as often as needed. And so to be loved that well by a Christ-centered guy during a moment of incredible pain, him as a teacher, I miss him deeply in my life, because the way that he loved people was so good. And it also gave me kind of a mold, a recipe to attempt to love people that well myself.
Someone you wanted to emulate to others in your life.
Absolutely. Yeah, if I can be a little bit more like Bruce Roque, I think I'm doing okay.
It sounds like it should have been his tagline. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe so.
A couple more questions for you here, and we can wrap up because again, you've been very kind with your time here this evening. In general, how does 90s youth group contribute to the person you are right now?
It was the true start of my personal relationship with Jesus. I'm not sure I ever leave the going to church on Sunday, going through the motions and the rituals of being quote unquote Christian. I'm not sure if I ever get past that if it's not for 90s youth, a 90s youth group. So if it wasn't for the experiences I had there, I'm not sure that I ever come to a personal relationship with Christ, which I think is the biggest difference maker in my life.
So the best, that's what they're going for, right? Like let's get these kids
Yeah,
started.
yeah, like yeah, it's a good commercial, a good a testimonial. But that's why also like I really believe in supporting youth groups. So like there was a time where with Eagle Brook, there's one school year where I like once a month I'd bring food. I bring like the meal and like the snacks and stuff to the junior high and high school boys group. Just like dropping off food. I didn't interact with students, but it was really cool to support the youth pastors. And I think that anything that we can do to support their efforts is well worth it because that's the next generation of people that are going
Yep.
to rise up.
A lot of people, some people are paid for it, a lot of people are not. A lot of people are giving a lot of time to those kids.
Tell you what, and it's a treasures in heaven thing, but it's so I'm not sure there's a better use of our time than to pour into kids and encourage them and love
Yeah,
on them well.
exactly. Well, one final question for you. You may know it's coming if you've listened to a podcast. If not, I always like to, unless people have answered it in the middle of the show. What was the craziest, zaniest, you mentioned TPing. What was the most outlandish thing you can remember your youth group doing? And it's okay if it is considered today probably not a legal or good idea.
I would have to say that whether it's been high school basketball or high school baseball, or I was never one of the cool kids.
Hmm.
So I was always on the outside, kind of looking. I liked people, and I think that for the most part, people like me. Okay, but I wasn't in the group that was doing the fun thing, that was doing I was always in bed on time,
Hmm.
at the retreat, meeting on time. So I wasn't on the inside of the shenanigans. So I don't have a great fun tale there because the kids that were probably part of the shenanigans, that just wasn't where
Sure.
I rolled. Yeah, I was too busy, praying for those people, type of thing. Not entirely, but yeah. So I wish I had better stories of that. I mean, I've done plenty of dumb in my life. Like, if you want to talk dumb, we could talk about that all day. But as it came to youth group, it just wasn't
Hmm.
there.
Hmm. We've asked that question to a few people and who have lived in different parts of the country. It seems to me that maybe the more south you get, the less necessary some of the crazy stuff is, because we've talked to some people who up here just did nuts, crazy things, and some people who were lived down in Kentucky, wherever, and they're just like, we weren't that desperate. Like we just showed up and had a good time. So I wonder how much of that was in there too. But that's not always a necessary thing to have a good youth group experience. Sometimes,
It is a fun question, though. That's a
yeah.
great question.
So we've got some really good answers on that too. But anyway, hey man, it's really good catching up with you, and it's really good to walk through the story with you. Because honestly, I mean, we know each other somewhat, but I never knew this part about you. So it's really cool to get to know you this way and understand this part of your life. And it's really cool to hear about the book and how the project has come to fruition finally. So congratulations on that.
Where can people find the book?
Kindle, Amazon should be up on Audible very, very, very soon. If they wanted a signed copy, they could go to lessonsfromcoach.com. Happy to send one their way. But all those places are where it can be found.
And then do you have any social media accounts for the book that people could follow?
This sounds terrible in pandering, but yes.
So my
Uh,
music podcast, I let people pander as much as they want. So I'm good at it. I'm just leading you right to
I right to the water. So all of the socials are, well, Instagram, and though I do not love the platform, TikTok. It's author Adam Irwin. And then Facebook, Adam Irwin is
Okay,
where you
cool.
can find it.
Nice.
Sorry, Scott. I just I had to get the sales. Let him get the sale pitch in.
Hey, I'm the salesperson. I
Ah.
forgot to ask the question, so good for you.
Well, and that's not, it's
No,
not my
no,
nature,
no.
but I appreciate the
It's- yeah.
opportunity.
It's a chance
Of
to
course.
if you. I think people are going to hear about it and be like, "Well, I'd like to know where I can find this." So just making sure that people can get to it. I mean, it sounds like a pretty compelling story and a pretty compelling book. So yeah,
It's certainly a premise I have not heard other
Yeah.
people write on, so people are going to be interested in it.
That's like one of the things, like, I got the idea originally after my first flight after 9/11 in 2001. So this was 23 years in the dreaming. And I can't believe that this title and this concept hasn't ever been written on before in the history of the world, so far as I know. Like, that blows my mind that no one else has done this.
Yeah.
But any which way. But also, I appreciate being able to share where people can find it and where I am on social media, if not only so that they can avoid it if they want to. Like, where do I need to stay away from if I don't want to see this book? What do I need to block on social media if I don't want to hear any more of this person? So, equal opportunity there
If I
too.
stumble across it, I'll know to, hit unsubscribe or whatever I need to do.
That's right. That's right. You just lost 40% of your subscribers after this podcast.
We don't have that many. It's fine. So, but yeah, man, really, really fun chatting with you. Really appreciate the sincerity and the thoroughness of your story. And yeah, I hope we can get to hang out a little bit more in the future.
That'd be awesome, Scott. And then Caleb,
Yeah.
thank you as well. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks for listening to this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. We hope you enjoyed it. Once again, we want to say thank you to Adam for joining the show to talk about his youth group experience, kind of how that impacted his life, and then also to share about his book. Again, it's called Lessons from Coach. And it can be ordered on Amazon and through Kindle and all those things. He's working on an audiobook for it. The website for it is lessonsfromcoach.com. Pretty simple, easy to find, just lessonsfromcoach.com. So go check that out. Let us know what you thought about this show or any of our other shows. You can find us on Twitter at the handle @SurviveYG. You can also email us at isurvivedyouthgroup@gmail.com. If you are interested in being on the show, let us know. You didn't have to attend our youth group to join the show, but if you have your own youth group experience from the 90s or the 2000s, we'd love to connect. We'd love to hear your story. Again, whether you're at the church you were raised at or you've left faith entirely, we want to hear your story and how that youth group experience has impacted your life. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, leave a rating or a review. If you enjoy this show, you might also enjoy the other podcast I do. It's a music podcast called the Album Anniversary Podcast. Over the last couple of years, I've researched and documented the release date of thousands of albums. Throughout the week, I post about them on social media. I've had a couple different formats on the show, but it's a chance to sit down with somebody and talk about an album that they love or that an album that's important to them. Where again has been documented on my little calendar. Once again, it's called the Album Anniversary Podcast. The music at the beginning and the end of this show is the instrumental version of the song Positive Charge by the artist Dread Pirate Roberts. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.